in that old machine mill. By the way, this slide is what will reframe large government, large financial services, and pretty well every other organisation you care to think of, including universities, hospitals, aged care, the lot. For example, I've got a good friend. He and some of his friends have set up a new aged care provider. They're Indians. When they tried to put their parents into an old age home, it was a disaster. So they've put their parents back in their homes. They've employed a doctor for 1/3 of the time. They have 2 ancillaries and 3 nurses. They contract the local Indian restaurants to provide food. They're registered as an aged care provider, so they can bulk buy all of the booster seats and all that kind of things. Less than half the cost of putting them in the homes. Half. So think about, so instead of having to build these kind of huge, sorry about anybody here who's built aged care homes, there's probably 1 or 2 of you, but you can start to see now the power of this networking technology in this process. One of the things that this means, I'll just go back before this slide. For me, is I think that there are 2 major opportunities for Penrith here. As you build your next socio-economic networking master plan, notice the change in term, 2 things I think are essential. One, I would like to see that the centre of Penrith has free access to the internet at speeds as fast or faster than anything that is in South Korea. If you do that, you will have people creating all kinds of things that you can only begin to imagine. And that will require a collaboration across all the people who are currently in the centre of the city. The second thing, I think, is to really start to think about what it will be like to produce renewables at the point of consumption. And there are cities, for example, like Wilhelmsburg in Germany, which is about 55,000 people, that in fact, through using renewables in the city, the centre of their cities, and I do remember how cold it was that winter that I was here, they were able to produce all their electrical and heating requirements. And they intend to have that right by 2025. So there's 2 things straight away. But it's not about the technology. It's about a way of thinking. The technologies will change, whatever the right platform is, all that stuff will change the whole time. We will all get new mobile phones every second day, whatever it might happen to be. It's about understanding that the model moves towards systems. It's about understanding that organisation form thing. It's about understanding that you build everything from the demand side, not from the supply push side. All of our large retail centres have all been supply push. The future is, I'm in control with my mobile phone. You supply what I want. And if you can't, I'll go somewhere else. By the way, I will have made that decision before I even move. So it's about really understanding that the demand, the mobile phones are pushing things from the demand side. And that requires people who supply things to think in very different kinds of ways. In the food industry, this is a revolution. Because there's always been, well, let's grow what we think we're good at, and who would want to buy it? And in a network world, as the World Economic Forum has said, the advantage moves from this competition model to unprecedented collaborations, the kinds of things that you were talking about, Paul. So it's about all of the people in the centre of the city now talking to each other and saying, how can we collaborate better? Asking questions like, look, I've got a lot of spare resources in my business, I'm only operating at 70%. Can anybody use them? Sitting at tables like that, doing collaboration speed dating, and the Village Well are particularly good at that, is a great way to do things. And the other thing that will happen is that every business, every institution, including the council, will need to fundamentally reinvent their business models. Because the reality is that in a world of expensive energy and all kinds of other concerns, the way we do things right now is simply clumsy and too expensive. And the examples that Mike Day gave around the car are just one view of that. Can I just check that this is interesting? Yes, good, thank you. Globally, there's a guy called Jeremy Ripken who's behind a lot of this material. He's the guy who sort of started this off, but he's not the only one. And you'll start to see that, in fact, large-scale developers, large-scale investors, and I consult to a number of those, are starting to understand that the world that I'm talking about represents the best investment opportunity of the next 100 years. So, the answers that you come up with today, will be setting the framework for the next 50 years. And you need to be looking forward to think about what the story of the future is, not what's worked in the past. It's not that what worked in the past was wrong, just like steam trains weren't wrong, it's just they didn't kind of work so well when we got electricity. So what does this mean? I think you need clearly to start to, well, let me talk about those two diagrams for a moment because they're both quite interesting. The first one is a building that's currently being built in Colombia, Bogota. It's called the Bacata building. And it is part hotel, part residences, part food, part retail, and part office. What makes it interesting was that they actually crowdsourced the design and the investment. What that means was they said to people, hey, we've got this really good idea. Anybody who's interested, here's our website. We would like you to come and talk to us. You may never come to Colombia at all, but if you've got any ideas, please help us. And if you're interested, any sum of money over $50 is just fine. Invest. So we're starting to see a future where the investors and the users, that's the demand people, are inside design. The architectural profession are in meltdown over this because they thought they did design. Well, they used to in the 20th century, and they're still necessary, and engineers. It's all right. The second picture is actually a New York building called 17 John. The building's there. Again, it's going to be a small, quite boutique hotel, and the guy is crowdsourcing both the investment and the design of the hotel. So he's saying to frequent business travellers, because it's down in the financial district, what do you want from a hotel? I'll tell you one thing that no business traveller wants, and that's power plugs on the floor. I can't tell you the number of times at 10 o'clock at night I'm on my hands and knees trying to put a power plug into a plug that's not designed for people like me. So what we need to start to do now is, in this future I'm describing, start to see the city, in particular the centre, as an ecology, not a machine, not a bunch of separate parts. And that means, and again I want to echo some of the words I heard this morning, increasing the diversity, because good ecologies have lots of diversity, lots of difference. And you know, with difference we get a bit of irritation. That's one of the things that happens. And out of irritation comes good things. We're going to see a lot of multi-use. We will see increasing flexibility. And most importantly, we will see people starting to have conversations about how they can add value to each other. Example, in Townsville, everybody in the centre of the city share one air conditioning system. There is a big pipe of chilled water running underneath the central business district. And everybody takes their air conditioning from it, because they're not competing for air conditioning, right? And then at night, the utility takes it back, pays very, very cheap rates for off-peak electricity, chills the water down, and it's used again the next day. Just an example. But I can show you example of people who are really collaborative. Or second example, in Cairns, long way from anywhere. I had a bunch of people in the room, they were complaining about their packaging costs. So I said, okay, we're going to stop the conference, come back tomorrow, bring your packaging list. You know, with all the things you want on it, which is exactly what you want. I said, just make sure it's all typed up nicely and put a dollar figure at the bottom. What we did was, we then put out a tender between all the people in the room. I think it was about $50 million worth of packaging. And that got the attention of packaging people, you know, all across the nation. Average packaging costs dropped 30%. The people in Cairns aren't competing on packaging. So it's these collaborations that start to make cities work. They start to take waste out of the system. Right now, when I see places like Penrith, what I see is there are other people away from Penrith who are making the money out of you. So, you know, when you travel backwards and forwards to the city, the oil companies are making lots of money out of that, thank you very much indeed. You know, and so on and so forth. What we have to do in this future is capture more value in the city. We need to start to see the city as this kind of collaboration space. And I think this revolution in work that I've just been talking about, and by the way, in my definition of work, this retirement thing fades off into the distance. You know, if you think about it the way we've done it, you know, we've kind of had to buy our childhood and our education, and then we've had to buy our work time, and now we've actually got to buy our retirement. And there are all kinds of businesses trying to take our money off us at each point in that process. Who made it up that the whole of life was a consumption experience? Where did that come from? I don't think it needs to be like that. So I can see lots of kinds of works. I can see, you know, people who are saying I want to work less often, wanting to work though in some quite sophisticated workplaces with other people, and you know, banging up against people who they might not have thought of, and then they can learn to collaborate. I see lots of marketplaces, and I'm not just talking about farmers markets. I'm talking marketplaces of ideas. I'm talking about marketplaces of collaboration. I'm talking about marketplaces of music and design. And cities that work really celebrate those marketplaces. And of course we've got those new workspaces. Because of that demand-driven thing, this notion of what's called the experience economy will be central. And that's about rethinking retail in particular. So they are experiences. And by the way, I had a great food experience last night at a place called The Union. Superb, really good. Particular kinds of foods, bit edgy, fun, pretty funky, and the food was stunning. And coming from Melbourne, I hate saying things like that. I think it's also about understanding that the workplaces of the future will be as much about keeping the kind of the work ethos together and hospitality spaces as it will be about actually sitting somewhere to do some work. By the way, for those of you who are as old as me, we're called baby boomers. Even if we continue to work until we're 105, the reality is that within 3 years there will be more Gen Ys working in the workforce than there are us. The power of numbers will finally change. We mightn't run away just yet, but the power of numbers will, because we're coming. The power of numbers will change. And their view about how you work, where you work, what constitutes hospitality and culture is really, really different than mine. And so our workspaces, and particularly those in Penrith, are really going to have to start to reflect that. And for some of us, that will be a bit tough. But also, you know, in this kind of experience economy, one of the things that I think is really starting to happen is a lot of urban food. And by the way, this is not just creating parks, it's creating vertical gardens and rooftop gardens. And one of the best wine bars I've been to was actually on a rooftop garden. It was stunning. And Penrith would be wonderful like that. Think of the views. Even 3 or 4 stories up would be great. But it's also about growing food in cities. And what a wonderful way, if we start to see more food grown in the city, for the kind of, if you like, the farming tradition to reconnect back into the city. And clearly it will be about finding ways and means to get people living in the city. It is ridiculous to build buildings that are only occupied for 8 hours out of 24. It's just a waste of money. So my suggestion to you is that to try and figure out how you put the kinds of things I'm saying into practical terms, and to rethink Penrith as part of this 21st century model is a possible narrative for your possible space. Thank you. I'm getting a wind up, which I really wanted. How long have I got, please? 5, 10? Roughly? 15? Okay. 5 minutes, thank you, and then I'll talk. That'd be great. Let me just quickly go through a few. So for me, it's about creating the story first. The second part is looking at the whole rather than the parts. And by the way, figuring out how you can create dwelling time in the city for people who have just got off a train. I bet that most of the people who arrive at the station go, thank God I'm almost home. They dash for their car, they jump in their car, and off they go. Why can't we create space, and as many cultures do, where there's a kind of a halfway space where they can stop and just be. In Milan it's called aperitivo. In Tonga it's called eba. It's about design and structures, it's about the feed, and it's also about understanding that the car of the future, and I'm probably pretty close to my day here, but I think the key message is the car will go from being the master, as it was in the 20th century, to being the servant in the 21st century. And we need to start to make that switch in our head. It's also about retrofitting. There is a huge amount of work going on right now about retrofitting. And what we're starting to find is, and the Empire State Building was kind of one of the inspirations, that there is a whole way that you can retrofit to really reduce all the energy and other costs that older buildings create. And I'm talking about half. Because right now, it's not enough just to lease floor space. The energy costs and the other odd costs, those are the ones that kill the small traders in the high street. Not the rent. It's all the other costs. The energy costs are horrific because the building lets heat like a sieve. So retrofitting, I think, can be part of this and should be part of this. And you see other work opportunities like the hub in Melbourne, where you're getting lots of edgy businesses coming together in old buildings, but with very, very good back office systems as ways to kind of use those buildings. I don't think that you can have the conversation I'm talking about in this model. We want to be different than what we are now. Let's design a solution. Let's try to implement it, and let's see. That's the model that we've done everything in the 20th century. It's called transactional thinking. What we have to do, and what I've been trying to talk about this morning, is we need to understand that many of the things that have made us successful are at their limits. The world of the future is different. The assumptions on which we based yesterday are not the same assumptions that will create tomorrow. All the frameworks that I've talked about, the language I've been using, and some of you might be quite angry with me right now, sorry about that, about different frameworks, different ways of thinking. And the new design must be informed by that story. If you have no story, all you have is a collection of projects. And I don't think that works anymore. And I can show you whole parts of New South Wales and Victoria that are just collections of things, and it looks like it. It doesn't work. There's unnecessary cost. And then you build the pathways, which is what this project's all about. And finally, you create the solutions. So look, that's, I hope that that's been coherent. There's a lot of material behind this. I've said to the organisers I'm happy to provide any of that. I am around until the end of this conversation today. What I'd like to do before I take some questions is just give you a minute or two at your tables before I take questions. A couple of minutes, please, so if someone can put the watch on that, Mike, if you could. So my question to you is, so what from what I've said? Take 2 or 3 minutes at your table to say, so what for Penrith out of what I've said, and then I'll take some questions. Thank you.